Hello, Blazers. Welcome to episode 161 of UAB Green and Told, originally released on Monday, October 20th, 2025. Through this podcast, we share the stories that make UAB special. Listen to past episodes of the campus's most downloaded podcasts at alumni.uab.edu/greenandtold on Spotify or the Apple Podcast app. While there, leave a review to help more alums discover us. I'm Greg Berry, a UAB alum and Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. Life, as it does, tossed in a few twists and turns for today's guests, shifting plans and rewriting paths in the most unpredictable ways. Carol Pittman's pursuit of purpose wasn't paved in a straight line. Instead, it was carved by choices, challenges, and the courage to come back. Her first step into college life was interrupted, but never erased.
After spending some time at UAB, then I married and did not come back to UAB for 12 years.
But Carol's story doesn't stop there. As she'll share, she found herself at a crossroads, but something inside her refused to give up.
Somehow, some way, this little spark of optimism and this hope that I've had for having a better life, and that has always fueled the ability to pivot myself.
And that spark didn't just light the way back to school, it ignited a new chapter, one built on risk, resilience, and relentless resolve.
You will worry about it, you will cry over it, and you will sacrifice, and it will be something that is with you constantly. You will not be able to turn it off.
In a quiet corner of Alabama where 3 counties converge, Carol Pittman's story took root. A natural leader, she was curious, confident, and unafraid to speak her mind. Today, she's a business builder, a Blazer alum, and a beacon of perseverance. But before all that, she was simply a young woman with a vision and a lot to prove.
Going to college and being the first person in my family to go to college was very important to me. I loved the idea of doing that and setting that example, not really understanding much about generational change at that point, but just wanting to really carry the torch, I think, for future generations. And so that was the plan. And I really was very interested in a number of things. So I really couldn't land on what I really wanted to be when I grew up. I was very, very focused from an entrepreneurial standpoint on, leading the way in whatever I did. But I knew I really needed to get a lot more exposure. And so I approached it with, okay, I have a job right now. I could go into a lot of different things, but I really want to, see where this leads me.
And see what leads me, you mean that entrepreneurship experience that you had?
I think that was always in my head about how can that happen? But then how can I also be successful, not really knowing what that's about. And, I did have a sense truly inside myself that I had some, growing to do and some learning to do. And just being from a small town, that was always in my mind that, there's a big world out there that's waiting and you're going to learn a lot of things. And ultimately, as you know, Greg, my path went a little differently. After spending some time at UAB, then I married and did not come back to UAB for 12 years.
When you chose UAB initially, why Birmingham? Why stay in town?
Well, I knew that I was going to have to work full time. There was no doubt. So I knew that it was going to need to be something that was going to facilitate working and going to school at night. And of course, at that point in time, UAB did a lot of night school and was more focused on commuting. And, so it just fit the bill for me. And I think it was exciting to me to come into the big city and, just have that exposure to a lot of different people. And I remember my first Psychology 101, I guess we all go into that very big auditorium and we're like, wow, there's lots of different people that come from lots of different backgrounds. And, and it was very exciting to me. It was like a big adventure.
What was campus like at that time?
It was not as sprawling, obviously. I remember just there seeming to be a lot of lost people. lost whether you were in your car trying to find a parking space. I learned to parallel park that first quarter. Or whether you're just trying to find your way around the buildings, but certainly, much smaller, more condensed as far as the footprint at that time. And lots of friendly folks, though. I just remember, all of the professors and students really just being super friendly, very open.
The first experience at UAB, how long were you on campus for? Was it a year and a half, 2 years before you left?
It was almost a year. It was almost a year. And that gave me enough time to really learn my way around and really start trying to figure out, this is what I need for core classes before I can start building on something for the future, and just getting to know teachers and, figuring out which ones could be most approachable for questions and things like that. So in that year, I was able to really learn my way around.
After that year, when you left UAB to focus on other things, life path just goes down different areas. Your family, were they disappointed that you weren't going to stick it out at the time?
I think that they were, but I think they held back judgment because I think most of them still were carrying that mantle of I didn't finish either. And I do remember my dad, especially, he's always pushing, don't give up, don't settle. You can, still that thread of you can be anything that you want to be, that you set your mind to. And I don't think anyone wanted to verbalize that disappointment, but at the same time, they were encouraging me to, wherever you find yourself, make the most out of that. And that was very important to me. And I think that it certainly served as the basis or the foundation that I could come back and step back up onto that platform to find my way back into my educational pursuits much later down the road.
During the 12-year lull, you found yourself, you started doing different things. Walk me through the experiences that you had between the first time at UAB and then when you returned. What were you doing?
Well, I had both my children during that first 9 years of the 12-year time period, my daughter and my son. And, I just threw myself into that. Crafting and play dates and field trips and cooking. So being dedicated to my family was extremely important. Even then, though, to help make ends meet, I sewed for the public. I smocked, I sewed, I made, little bunny rabbits and dresses and draperies. And, even then wanted to be sure that I was making my way and that I was learning, again, that curiosity, wanting to learn something new that, continues to follow me even today. But it was a time period where there were disappointments personally. At the same time, I look back and I think that it is perhaps the most important part of my life because of the investment and into my children during that time. And also, I began during that time to really formulate more of who I was and who I was about, and not wanting to be crippled by the reality of divorce, and wanting to be sure that I was an example for my children and how I turned that around and how I made a new life for us. But, for women especially, I think it's often, into our 30s before we really begin to understand what we're about and what defines us. And we can begin to structure, okay, I have these goals and dreams. Now, how do I actually operationalize some plan to be able to reach those? And so it was a fascinating time, a time of overcoming struggles and challenges, getting my footing, getting myself back on track. I think I've shared with friends, I was very driven during that time when I was turning my life around and coming back to UAB. So interesting times.
Professionally, what were you doing?
I was a full-time homemaker while I was at with the kids. And then once I divorced, I actually came back to the American Cancer Society. I had worked for the American Cancer Society right out of high school, and leveraged those same connections that I had when I was, done with that chapter in my life of staying home with the kids, and fell back into it, and really was very grateful at that time to be able to come back into a work environment that was very positive, with people that I knew, where I could work on my personal issues as well as have some flexibility. And Greg, that's just one of the key aspects, I think, of coming back after divorce and wanting to finish that degree, was I had people in my life that gave me the flexibility I needed to do that while still studying at the ballpark, and sitting in the piano teacher's driveway while my daughter took lessons. It was just a lot of people supporting me and encouraging me during that time.
When you left UAB the first time after a year, did you always have a goal to come back, or did at one point it just kind of go away and then it just popped back up and you went, all right, you know what? I do want to do this.
It never went away. It never went away. I am a person who's fascinated by knowledge and constantly pursuing knowledge. I never gave up on that. So wherever I found myself, I wanted to really dig into that. When I came back and began working for the American Cancer Society as a cash manager, I wanted to hone that skill. I wanted to learn everything that I could about cash concentration and various financial products that would help. So wherever I found myself, even during that time as a homemaker, I really wanted to throw myself into that as much as possible.
What made the late 90s, when you decided to come back, the right time?
I think for a lot of people, we reach this threshold where we recognize how short life is, and that we can pivot, and that we can find options regardless of, how challenging the situation is, how unhappy we might be. There's always hope. And I had a great therapist in Birmingham tell me one time, he said, you just never give up, Carol. You just never give up. He said, you're just one of the most optimistic people, even in light of some very serious challenges that you faced. And so somehow, some way, this little spark of optimism and this hope that I've had for having a better life, and that has always fueled the ability to pivot myself over the course of many different things in my lifetime. And obviously the other part of that was my children. I wanted to take care of us. I wanted to be sure we had a way. I wanted to be able to keep a roof over our heads, just the practical things, but also provide for them that example as well of not giving up.
You changed a lot. 2 kids, divorce, moved to North Alabama, came back. But the campus, university changed as well. What changed the most in those 10, 12 years you were absent from UAB?
The kids, just how, just what the kids were exposed to, I think, helped them to be able to be more engaged. The first time around, it was more, you would come into the classroom and you would sit and someone would lecture and you would, be prepared for the exam. Coming back, it was very amazing because of the level of engagement. The kids were just so smart. And of course, technology, I feel like, Greg, I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like I've just lived the most interesting almost 59 years of human existence. When I started out in business tech education at Corner High School, we were on electric typewriter. Now we are here on the precipice of artificial intelligence. And so that time period of 12 years, which had elapsed, had brought technology and all the advancements and emojis and the internet and email and all of that to the forefront. And people were just incorporating that into their way of learning. And of course, for me, being an adult, oftentimes I would have my skirt suits and heels. I would be running in there. I ruined so many pairs of heels going to UAB back to school and trying to get to class. And so I would be there, sort of sticking out like a sore thumb, but never really worried about that. But I would sit and I would just watch these kids and how amazing they were and how interested they were in their future. And so the whole paradigm had shifted from my parents say that I need to come to college, and so I'm here and I'm here to be led, to what I experienced 12 years later, where these kids had a plan and they were preparing to execute on that plan. So it was very interesting for me to watch that and to be a part of it again as well.
You decided to major in communication studies. Was that the original major too?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. When I first, I guess in 1984, I was thinking, I'll just go ahead and put accounting down just because I'm in this financial role with the American Cancer Society, but I don't think I'm a numbers person. And so when I came back, I thought, okay, Carol, why don't you just take a big step back and just think about, number one, what you're interested in? Because you now have this career in banking. At that point, I'd moved on in the American Cancer Society, I'd moved on to my first banking job. And I thought, okay, this is going to be a career that I think I can be successful. So, I'm looking around and I'm seeing people with biology degrees and history degrees, and I'm seeing all these different degrees, not necessarily in finance. And so I thought, if I'm going to be here and I'm going to, really put forth this effort, I need it to be something that I find very interesting. And so psychology and sociology and communications were the things that bubbled up to the top, although I do love history so much. I could have easily gone any of those routes. And I thought, communication may serve me the best because I know I want to be a professional. I want to be able to communicate. I want to be able to lead people. And so I really think communication may be it. And so the more that I studied it, go to Stern Library and read books about communication and communication research especially, I just continued to be very interested in communications. And ultimately, that is what I majored in with a minor in psychology. And I would say both of those have helped me so much. I'm so glad that I landed there as opposed to trying to lock into something else.
What was it like balancing not just your homework, not just a career, 2 kids while you're going to class?
Oh my gosh, Greg, it was crazy. I mean, I would wake up about 5:30 in the morning, study, wake the kids up, and we'd have breakfast. I'd get them to school. I'd study through lunch. And on the nights that I had school, my mom would get the kids from daycare. And then I would get home and in time to tuck them in, and I would stay up and study. I mean, that's why I was so driven. I think I may have been a little crazy. So that whole time, I just kept saying, this is a chapter, and you're going to get through it. And it's going to be so much better on the other side, but you don't have an option. You've got to do this, for your kids. You've got to do this for yourself. And so I just put one step in front of the other. And I remember I had this one sheet of paper that I had all of the courses that I would need, to have that piece of paper at the end. And I would look at it multiple times during the quarter inside my pocket notebook, but I would never allow myself to check it off until I saw my grade. And that just became a little milestone tracker, if you will, my little project plan. That was the way that I did it. I just survived for the 3.5 years, just one step in front of the other, one class after another. A lot of driven nights, a lot of tired days, a lot of crazy weekends, just trying to get through it.
In 2001, when you got it done, you crossed that stage. What was that feeling like?
I almost considered not walking. And my mom and I remember the conversation, and I said, it's going to be a lot of people, and it's a lot of people, a lot of people there, a lot of people crossing the stage. And she said, yeah, but your kids are going to watch this. And that was the thing. That was really what became important, was that my kids came and they watched me walk the stage. It felt surreal, but at the same time, I was so glad it was over. I just was so exhausted and so happy that part was over, like a lot of, college students feel at that time. But I was so happy that my kids were there to see it.
I asked before about your family's disappointment, and you admitted that there's probably some. How much elation do you think there was with your mom being able to experience that with you?
I think they knew it was so much work and it took so much out of me. At the same time, I think they struggled to really understand, what it all meant. What does this all mean now? How will her life really change? And then, of course, I think at some point, the way that they began to think of it is it helps me get ahead.
What's more challenging for you? Returning to school after a decade plus layover, or starting a business?
Oh, starting a business.
Yeah.
No doubt. Starting a business. And, I consult and coach a number of folks who are thinking about making the transition into entrepreneurship. I was on the board and ultimately did a lot of coaching in the Central Alabama Women's Business Center many years ago when it was around. And what I've tried to describe to people is this is like having another child. And you will worry about it, you will cry over it, and you will sacrifice, and it will be something that is with you constantly. You will not be able to turn it off. And so in that way, if you get it, you get it, and you must do it. If you're on the cusp of whether you should or not, more than likely you should not. But there's no doubt in my mind that entrepreneurship is so much harder, because I think you may recall that I actually started RedKnot in 2008. And everybody that remembers 2008 is like, holy cow, how did you survive? Quite possibly the worst time to start a business is what some people would say. However, I think it made me better. I think it made me better at conserving my capital and being more judicious about, the things I engaged and with whom I engaged. And, but to me, it's just so much harder starting a business. And of course, now we're going to be 16 years old and getting over those early humps. Very, very difficult. Although I would say a lot of the same characteristics were present in both of the pursuits, that discipline and being driven and just not letting people get you down and not letting people get in your way. And so a lot of the same things, I think, have taken me through both of those and through this journey that I'm continuing now.
When did the idea of RedKnot pop up?
As a child, I had a little vegetable stand. My grandfather was a farmer. He was a retired coal miner. He was a moonshiner, among other things, before he became a gentleman farmer. And I remember there was one summer we had a lot of vegetables left over, and he called me Tad, and he said, "Hey, Tad, you wanna try to sell these vegetables on the side of the road, and I'll let you keep the net." And I thought like fishing net. No, he had explained to me what that meant, and that we would take the expenses out of it. And he just made up some expenses. I know, at that time I didn't understand it. But I did that for a few summers, and that's where the entrepreneurship bug really bit me. And my dad was an entrepreneur after he retired from the city of Birmingham. I knew others, and I was just like, how cool. You're in business for yourself and you get to do what you want to do. Which is so hilarious to me now. And so fast forward into banking, we hired a lot of consultants and worked with a lot of vendors, and I would see what they were doing for the bank. And then I began to think, I think this is something that I can do. I can be a consultant. The things that I'm learning to do here, I think I can parlay this into solutions that could help community banks or credit unions. at the time I began to develop the business plan and move out of banking was when the merger environment really began to heat up. And so I was actually tapped to do some merger integration work, which ultimately is sort of how I gained my name, if you will allow me to say that, and was able to really get the leg up on building RedKnot. And of course, now we have several different verticals that we work in and been able to expand that along the way.
What all does RedKnot do? Obviously, you probably still have a banking or a credit union tie, but what does the company do?
You know, it's interesting. The biggest part of our revenue pie is now third-party risk management. So a company wants to engage a vendor or a third party in a formal business arrangement, and they want to understand all the risks associated with doing business with that third party. And so there's a lot of due diligence around that.
Okay.
And of course, now layering AI into it, it requires a solid understanding of the regulatory environment as well as the potential risks. And then as those risks are identified, putting in the right mitigation strategy to be able to conduct that business and use that vendor. Most of us have heard about breaches. We've been touched by breaches.
Yeah.
So we know that these companies are using vendors which may not have solid cybersecurity protocols and processes. And so that's just one example of the things that we try to really monitor for our clients. I still do some consulting. And in fact, it's very interesting, my life. My employees, they get a real big kick out of it. But these very large banks, they have some very complicated integrations, whether that's through an acquisition or whether it's from a very large technology platform build out. You know, folks who've been around as long as I have, we just know about some things and we kind of know where all the bones are buried. And so every now and then I will get a big call. I'll get a call from a very big bank, a top 5, that says, we just need you for 6 months to come and do this very specific thing. And it's usually of a highly confidential nature. I usually can't talk about it with anybody until the project is already over and implemented. But it gives me just as my employees say, you're just going to go sharpen your claws a little bit. And I'm very lucky to have such a supportive team of professionals who keep RedKnot going while I do these small projects.
When you started, was it just you?
It was just me. Yeah, little old me. And for a year, I remember I called and had conversations and had coffee and, tried to figure out what the heck I was doing. So it was me. But during that point in time, also, I got to know a lot of people and networked with a lot of people who were also trying to figure things out because of the downturn in the economy. So ultimately, I began to build a strong network of consultants and contractors. And today I have a mix of employees and contractors based on the kind of gig and the needs. I'm able to bring people off the bench if needed or leverage my employees.
Talk about how AI is changing the landscape of what you do, because it's changing everything. You brought up the topic a little while ago, and I just want to delve into that to see how it's helping you, and maybe there's challenges as well.
Well, it's one of those things where, and I just must say this because, as you know, I spent a lot of time getting certified and passing the Artificial Intelligence Governance Professional exam. And it is changing absolutely everything. And I remember standing last summer in Brussels on a break from a training class and calling back to the States to talk to my mom. And she said, I'm just not going to do AI. And I very gently asked, Mom, AI is already doing you. And I think that's the big thing, is it has been incorporated into our lives and we're not even aware of it because third parties, vendors, companies have what we call shadow AI. They've actually begun to use artificial intelligence without communicating that to us. Now, my own company, we leverage AI to do a ton of data analysis, and it has been extremely helpful. So if we want to analyze data, we want to extract data, We want to do a lot of writing or summaries that we put together, risk assessments that we put together. So we've leveraged it more from content and writing and data analysis. It's just been extremely interesting, though, to see how our clients, either they've been extremely reluctant or they've gone headlong into it and been a little more trusting and having less oversight than they probably should, or I know that they should.
Carol Pittman turned a detour into a degree, graduating in 2001 from the College of Arts and Sciences with a focus in communication studies. Today, she's CEO of RedKnot Resource Group and a proud recipient of our Alumni Business Awards. Carol doesn't just represent the UAB spirit, she embodies it and knows what it means to be a blazer.
I think being a blazer is an extension of UAB into my city, into my state in a way that's very unique. I talk about UAB wherever I go, and I talk about it because people, where are you from? I'm from Birmingham. Oh. And then that's when I'm like, I've got an opportunity here to tell you a little bit about us. And, usually I talk about just the attention that we get from all over the world and the name that UAB has made for itself, not only as as a university, but obviously the medical school and the tremendous impact that has had for Birmingham and for our state. I think just spreading the good word and being that positive voice for our community is so important. Being a blazer, I think, is distinguished in a way that it means success, and that there are people who want you to be successful and who will support you while you're trying to be successful, just like they did me.
Thanks for spending time with us on UAB Green and Told. To hear more stories from the UAB community, visit alumni.uab.edu/green and told or find us on Spotify and the Apple Podcast app. Got a guest suggestion? We'd love to hear it. Email us at greenandtold@uab.edu. And be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more alumni stories and updates. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Blazers.